Good afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the 151st annual meeting at the U.S. Naval Institute. I'm Ray Spicer, CEO and publisher here at the Institute, and it is great to see so many friends, supporters of the Institute here this afternoon. Thanks for spending your afternoon with us, both those of you that are here in person and those of you who are beaming in from afar. It's just great to have you. We've got a great program lined up for you. At the outset, we're going to take care of some business. We're going to kind of quickly go through that. We're going to spend the better part of the time recognizing some really deserving authors. And then we're going to hear from the Commandant of the Marine Corps, General Eric Smith, who's agreed to come be our featured speaker, which is great. And then we're going to wrap things up with a reception above here on our topside terrace. So welcome, everybody. Now that you are comfortably seated, I'm going to ask that you please rise and join me in reciting the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you very much. As you know, the annual meeting is when we announce the results of our elections. We have three boards here at the Institute. Our Board of Directors, led by former Deputy Secretary of Defense, the Honorable Bob Work, as chair, and former Chief of Naval Operations, Admiral John Greenert, as vice chair. We welcome both current and future members of our Board of Directors with us here this afternoon. We have our Foundation Board of Trustees, led by former Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Pete Pace. We also welcome our trustees who are here with us in attendance today. And then finally, we have our editorial board, led by Captain Tom Clarity. Joining us today are members of that outstanding editorial board. I thank all of our board members for the fantastic support they have provided the staff and me. We have a few former board members in the audience with us today as well. I think, at least in the audience, Admiral Sandy Winnefeld. I saw him earlier, but he may be joining in progress. Vice Admiral Sally Bryce O'Hara, I did see. Lieutenant General Chip Gregson, Mr. Mark Johnson, and Mr. John Morton. Thank you for continuing to show up in support of the U.S. Naval Institute. We also welcome Commandant of Midshipmen, Colonel McDonough, here this afternoon. Thanks for joining us, Colonel. And we're going to have the former Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Admiral Mike Mullen, join us at some point in the progress of the program. So welcome, everyone. If I missed anyone, I apologize. We thank our sponsor of the Institute's annual meeting, L3 Harris, represented today by Rear Admiral Gucci Klunder. Thank you so much for the support, Gucci, and helping make this event possible. I assumed the watch as CEO and publisher on December 1st, and I could not be happier to be here in this job. I'm humbled and honored to have been selected to lead our dedicated team here at the Institute and build upon the many successes achieved by my predecessor, Pete Daly, over the past 12 and a half years. I mentioned that we'd start by taking care of some business. Our Constitution and bylaws require that we come together at the annual meeting to discuss the state of the Institute and to announce our election results. We'll start with the election results for our Board of Directors. We elected current board member, former PACOM commander, and former U.S. Ambassador to Korea, Admiral Harry Harris, as our new board chair. We elected current board member, former Undersecretary of Defense for Acquisition and Sustainment, the Honorable Ellen Lord, as our new board vice chair. We elected 5 new board members. Retired Vice Admiral Fred Midget, former commander of Coast Guard Pacific Area and Defense Forces West. Mr. Mike Petters, former executive vice chairman of the board of directors at HII, where he previously served as president and CEO. Retired Lieutenant General Lori Reynolds, former Deputy Commandant for Information for the Marine Corps. Retired Admiral Chaz Richard, former Commander, U.S. Strategic Command, and former Master Chief Petty Officer of the Navy, Russ Smith. We re-elected 4 directors, Mr. Tom Furlong, Mr. Bill Hannigan, Mr. Mel Immergut, and retired Lieutenant General and my Naval Academy classmate, Whaler Walsh. We also welcome our new chair of the editorial board to the board of directors, Captain Tom Clarity, and our new appointed board member, Lieutenant Calvin Cass, to continue our initiative to include younger, active duty, and diverse voices on our board. We welcome 3 new board liaisons. Navy Rear Admiral Fred Pyle, Deputy Director, Surface Warfare Division, N96. Marine Brigadier General Bams Brody, Prospective Director, Expeditionary Warfare Division, N95. And Coast Guard Board Liaison, Rear Admiral Select Adam Shammy, Prospective Assistant Commandant for Response Policy. We also recognize directors who have completed their 6-year terms as members of the board today. We thank the Honorable Bob Work and retired Admiral John Greenert for their leadership as chair and vice chair, respectively. We also thank other directors who either already completed their time as members of the board or will do so effective today. They include Admiral Thad Allen, Rear Admiral Peg Klein, Admiral Bill Moran, and Vice Admiral Pete Daly. Most of these directors served 6 years on the board, and what a 6 years they had. These board members oversaw a significant expansion of the Institute's reach and engagement, the strong response taken to meet the many challenges of continuing to operate during the global pandemic, and a very, very ambitious and successful Jack C. Taylor Conference Center capital project that went through final design, bidding, construction, and successful startup during that period. They provided steadfast support for and contributed to our open, independent, nonpartisan forum. They all leave the Institute in a much stronger position than when they started, and that's an amazing legacy for which they should be justifiably proud. We salute them and thank them for their work in support of the Institute. For the amazing accomplishments of these departing directors, I'd ask that you please join me in a huge round of applause. We also say farewell and thanks to Lieutenant Commander Michelle Foster, our previous chair of the editorial board, and Lieutenant Troy Thompson, our junior board member. Their insights and contributions from an active duty junior officer perspective were invaluable. We also thank our 3 departing board liaisons who either have changed or are about to change assignments. Major General Steroid Anabali, who's bound for Okinawa in command of 1st Marine Air Wing. Rear Admiral Joanne Burdian, who will be taking command of Joint Interagency Task Force South in Key West, Florida next month. And Vice Admiral Fred Kacher, who recently assumed command of U.S. 7th Fleet in Japan. Collectively, this comprises some pretty high-powered talent rolling off our board. They've all contributed significantly to the critically important mission of the U.S. Naval Institute. Please give this team one more round of applause for all their hard work. Next up is our editorial board. The editorial board is vital to the credibility of the open forum. Their active duty perspective provides us with an invaluable view and course guidance for Proceedings magazine. New members on the editorial board are highlighted in blue. They are Dave Aliberti, Craig Allen, Calvin Cass, Lucy Ford, Sonny Gomez, and Tiffany White. We thank our departing editorial board members, Michelle Foster, Andrea Howard, Troy Thompson, and Scott Wells. All members of the Ed Board are active duty, and they do this work above and beyond their day jobs in the Navy, Marine Corps, and Coast Guard. We thank them for their time, their commitment, and their invaluable insights. Finally up is our Naval Institute Board of Trustees, who are not elected, but appointed by our Board of Directors. We thank our terrific trustees for volunteering their time and their steadfast support to the Institute. Special thanks to General Pete Pace for his leadership as chair of the Board of Trustees and guiding the Naval Institute Foundation during a period of extraordinary growth. We're also honored to have the support from new trustees, Mr. Marty Bollinger, Ms. Jane Clayson Johnson, Mr. Dirk Moses, and Captain Mike Salvedo. And we also thank Mr. Mel Immergut for taking over from Admiral Greenert as the elected director from our Board of Directors, who also sits on the Board of Trustees. We thank Vice Admiral Daly and Admiral Greenert as they rotate off the Board of Trustees, and we give special thanks to Marty Rodemaker for her time as a trustee. Her professional experience as president and CEO of First Citizens Bank was instrumental in guiding the Naval Institute as we built the Jack C. Taylor Conference Center. Okay, I said we were going to take care of business right up front. That's our election results and changes to our board composition. The other reason we are here together is to share with our members the state of your Naval Institute and what we've been up to, and to give you a glimpse of where we intend to go. Now, I can stand here and tell you all about these great accomplishments. I'm afraid I would have to wake you when I'm done. So we thought we would show you instead. So see what you think.
Critical thinking. Your job is to outthink the enemy and take as much of the load off your troops as you can, so at the point of contact, the enemy's annihilation is a sure thing.
Building. We need greater investment in our commercial and naval shipbuilding industry if we are to build a more lethal and a bigger Navy. And we need to start that journey now.
At the age of 83 now, Halliburton has written Reflections on Captivity, an incredibly powerful book from the man who was supposed to be dead.
And I was not going to take that home. I had already said, when I get out of here, these people are never going to adversely affect my life again. And so when I walked out of the gate, would get on the bus to go to the airport, I just turned around and said, I forgive you. And all that hatred, that armor fell away.
So that's a brief tour of some books I can recommend to get you started on the US Navy. And a good chunk of what you've seen here is published by the USNI, US Naval Institute Press.
The first report came today from USNI News, the U.S. Naval Institute, citing...
Sam Lagrone with the Naval Institute tells us this is an especially long deployment with crew members.
Check this out. The U.S. Naval Institute says 104-year-old Pearl Harbor survivor Frank Imond just broke his own Guinness World Record as the world's oldest conductor.
I'm going to start with a very simple question. Do you have optimism that they are going to be able to find this vessel?
No.
That's a hard answer to hear.
And this comes as multiple local ships are supporting Israeli forces in the Red Sea. The U.S. Naval Institute says that includes the USS Mason and USS Carney.
According to the U.S. Naval Institute, Lieutenant Colonel Glenn earned $8 that day.
Welcome back. In today's event spotlight, West 2024 is coming from FCA International and the U.S. Naval Institute.
So I'm going to ask to enter into the record a U.S. Naval Institute study on offshore wind energy, a rising challenge to Coast Guard operations.
Early last year, at the beginning of Russia's war against Ukraine, the United States Naval Institute found evidence of potential dolphin training camps near a Black Sea naval base.
这个美国智库说呢，台湾适合呢多放水雷，啊，因为本小利大，一个水雷几个钱呢？砰，炸掉一个大陆船的。
What'd you think? See, now I don't have to tell you all that. Don Walsh, man, a few words. May he rest in peace. We're grateful to our donors and members and board members and supporters who helped make this great work possible over the last year. And that was only the wave tops of what this staff of only about 60 people accomplishes every day. So I would like to ask every Naval Institute staff person to please stand so you can be recognized for the great work that you do each and every day. Thank you. Of course, not all the Institute's accomplishments over the past year can be conveyed in an 8-minute video, so I want to highlight just a few more things, not just from the past year, but from the past decade. We have digitized a great portion of our content, 150 years worth of proceedings, 38 years worth of Naval History magazine, and we're in the final phase of digitizing our most important photos. We built the Jack C. Taylor Conference Center that you have the pleasure of experiencing right now. We have a physical space that gives us the power to convene and host many of our own conferences and events. So now we can do home games in addition to away games. And in addition to our own Naval Institute events, we regularly rent the conference center out to military, government, and professional organizations. Over the past year, we've had the honor of hosting some very important groups, including our Chief of Naval Operations, came here for her first time, hosted a retired 4-star conference just about a month ago. Commandant of the Marine Corps held his 3- and 4-star executive offsite meeting here last year and will be back again this year. Lockheed Martin's Surface Warfare Officer Flag Conference held in conjunction with the Naval Academy's Ship Selection Night and the Defense Science Board. And those, again, are just a few of the highlights. All these groups utilize the conference center's capability to hold classified discussions in this conference center up to the TS-SCI level. 10 years ago, we built USNI News from the ground up. This daily news publication has become a go-to source of reliable, credible news on the sea services. We now have readership of over 21 million. Our oral histories are now readily available and accessible on Amazon. That just happened, and people are buying them. The number of essay contests has grown from just a handful to 11 annual contests. These contests attract participation from a large audience and generate content well beyond the winning essays. In just a few minutes, we will recognize some of those award-winning authors. I am proud to stand here and say the state of the Institute is strong. And thanks to your support, we are in an excellent position financially for the Institute to begin its next 150 years. I'll close with just a little about the future and where we'd like to take the Institute. First and foremost is build on the success and continue the great momentum that was started under Pete Daly's leadership. I think the Naval Institute ship is headed fair in the channel. I want to keep it in the channel, but I want to kick it up a few knots. We need to protect our rich content from external threats, and by threats I mean primarily cybersecurity threats. We've done a lot of that already, but we want to protect our ability, protect our content, and preserve our ability to distribute that content and produce it and get it to our users. We want to expand our production of digital content and adapt to how readers consume information today. I think it's safe to say that people consume information far differently today than they did, say, 10, 15 years ago. I want to make sure that we are agile enough to respond to those users and deliver content the way they want it delivered. And of course, we want to continue to expand our reach and exposure. We intend to look at all these and more as we develop our next strategic plan. And we, of course, welcome inputs from our members, so please don't be bashful. I've been here almost 6 months. I've already met some people who are not bashful, so I'm getting plenty of advice. Keep it coming. I'd love to hear it. As our call to action, I ask our members and supporters, please stay engaged, stay informed, continue the great support of the Institute, exercise your right as a member to vote, and importantly, to nominate new board members. And finally, I ask for your help with recruiting. Just like the Navy, we could always use help recruiting. Every member, go get a new member. And that would be awesome if you could do that. So thank you very much for your attention. I now invite Captain Bill Hamlet, U.S. Navy retired, our superb editor-in-chief of Proceedings Magazine, to the stage to kick off our author award presentations.
All right, good afternoon. I'm very pleased to announce several award winners today, starting with the winners of 3 of our essay contests. The Naval Institute has been running essay contests since 1879. As Ray said, we have 11 annually, and a great deal of our proceedings content and naval history content comes from those contests, because not only do we publish the top 3 prize winners, but we evaluate every submission for publication, even if it doesn't win a prize. All our essay contests are judged in the blind. We don't know who the authors are until the screening and judging is complete, and we like it that way. It makes our contests true meritocracies. The first winners to be recognized today are from the Leadership Essay Contest, sponsored by the Doctors Jack and Jennifer London Charitable Fund. This contest is open to any officer in the Navy, Marine Corps, and Coast Guard from 01 to 04. And this year, the Coast Guard swept the contest. The third prize winner is Lieutenant Commander Drew Stafford. His article is titled "The Power of the Mid-Level Leader," which makes the important point that you don't have to be at the top of an organization to exert leadership. His article will be published in the July issue of Proceedings, and Lieutenant Commander Stafford recorded his remarks.
Good afternoon. I want to start by saying thank you to the U.S. Naval Institute and their support of the afloat community. These essay contests are an outstanding way for us to gather and share our thoughts. Over the last few years, I've had the privilege to work alongside some outstanding junior leaders in the Coast Guard. This has given me the opportunity to observe, learn, and discuss what makes these people effective. In my essay, The Power of the Mid-Level Leader, and their effect on climate and unit cohesion, I discussed some of the behaviors that allow these people to be effective, and also discuss the importance and the impact that having strong mid-level leaders can have in our organization. So thank you very much for the opportunity to share today.
This year's second prize winner is Coast Guard Lieutenant Nick Jabs. His article is titled "Don't Run Faster Than Your Crew," a very honest and humble self-inspection that frankly took a lot of courage to write. Lieutenant Jabs also pre-recorded his remarks.
Good evening, U.S. Naval Institute from the Arabian Gulf. It is a privilege and an honor to accept this award for my essay, Don't Run Faster Than Your Crew, while still standing in command of the Glen Harris. If you told me a few years ago that 1, I'd be captain of a ship, and 2, that I'd win an award for writing, I would have doubted you, but nevertheless, I stand here today as both. And the experience of being in command taught me a lot, and it taught me it fast. Having to sound the collision alarm is the last thing that any commanding officer wants to do, but it helped shed light on a rudder command that my leadership style needed. I needed to instill trust, transparency, and morale into my crew, and having made these changes is the reason that I'm still standing here on deck. Command at Sea was truly a humbling experience and inspired me to share these lessons with rising leaders and future commanding officers so that they may learn from my experience and improve their future commands. Thank you and have a great evening.
And this year's first prize winner is Lieutenant Matthew Nagel, U.S. Coast Guard. His article, "Follow Your Gut," was published in the May Proceedings. It examines the difficult choice leaders often face in stressful situations between trusting their gut and asking higher headquarters for guidance. I'd like to ask Dr. Jennifer London to join me on the stage and Lieutenant Nagel for the presentation.
Good evening, General Smith, Rear Admiral Spicer, distinguished guests, friends and family. Thank you so much to the Naval Institute for this generous award. Thank you very much to my family in attendance, including U.S. Navy retired Commander Gene Kelly, excuse me. Pop-up, thank you for being here. And of course, thank you to the crew of Coast Guard Cutter Tern. I love a good sea story, and without the Naval Institute, I'm not sure that this is a sea story that I ever would have shared. It's not funny, it's not a unique story, and it's not one that I'm especially proud of. It's a time where I got scared, and I used that to get smart. I'm the commanding officer of an 87-foot coastal patrol boat in Northern California, and we were conducting a search and rescue case for 3 mariners in distress who had been disabled in a storm the night before. We got on scene, hooked up a tow, and we're taking them back to San Francisco. I remember thinking to myself that for so many mariners in distress, the difference between life and death is a tow line connected to the U.S. Coast Guard, and then the tow line broke. We had been battling brutal beam 2 seas and gale force winds to get on scene, and now the mariners that we had set ourselves to save their lives were once again in peril. And it was dark, and I was afraid. And I started searching inside myself for what to do next. And the answer that I came up with was call my boss. What an awful idea. We're the Coast Guard. This is search and rescue. This is our thing. I had a reliable crew, a reliable ship, and everything that I needed to safely do this mission. We repaired the tow line, reconnected the tow, and brought them safely back to San Francisco. But the work wasn't done. At sea, I trust my instincts with my life and with the lives of my crew. And my instincts told me to do something that I knew was wrong. So I needed to learn more. So I picked up the pen. And I created a leadership framework for decision makers in the field, operational military leaders, to help them make decisions like the one that I was faced with that night. Hope it can be a help for future leaders. Thank you very much to the Naval Academy and to the Naval Institute. Semper Paratus, go Coast Guard. Thank you very much.
The second group of contest winners to be recognized today are the winners of the Information Warfare Essay Contest, sponsored by Booz Allen Hamilton and represented today by Miss Matisse Springer Wright. All 3 essays will be in the June issue of Proceedings, which we're working on right now, and they all add significant, important new ideas to the ongoing discussion about information warfare. The third prize winner is Major Stone Holden, U.S. Marine Corps. His article is a wake-up call titled The Soft Cyber Underbelly of the U.S. Military, and it draws lessons from how Hamas exploited the online information about the Israeli military to increase the lethality of its attacks on 7 October. Please welcome Major Holden to the stage.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I appreciate the opportunity to be here, the opportunity to write, to compete, the honor of accepting this award. My essay, as I said, was inspired by the attacks launched by Hamas against Israel on October 7th of last year, but taking a different look, a different frame, if you will, through the cyber threat that played a huge enabling role. Most people think of countries like China, Russia, or even North Korea when they imagine cyber actors planning and executing complex attacks from a shadowy basement somewhere. Interestingly, Hamas was able to use cyber capabilities to greatly enhance their attack, providing in-depth intelligence gleaned straight from the computers and smartphones of the very people that they were attacking. This really drove home for me the threat that even non-state actors can have and increasingly pose to our Marines and sailors as they operate around the globe. Do we think that our people are too savvy to fall for cyber honeypots, delivering malware-loaded risque photos? Are they even aware of the threat? And what can we do to improve the cyber training that we give these warfighters? The threat of cyber attacks and cyber espionage are ones that impact our force now and will come from an ever-increasing number of directions as the technology and know-how proliferates globally. I propose that we need to be orienting Marines and sailors against these threats, giving them the tools to protect themselves, and increasing the training each year so you don't have personnel with 20 years of service getting the same Cyber 101 training that they likely tuned out 15 or 10 years ago. We don't want to find out in the next war that well-meaning service members provided critical information to our adversaries because they didn't know or understand the scope of the threat that sits in their own pockets. So thank you again to the team here at U.S. Naval Institute, editorial team as well, and the Marines and sailors that I have the privilege to work with every single day. It's an honor being on this stage, and I'm hopeful that forums like this can spark changes that push our force towards better capabilities. Thank you.
The second prize winners are Professor Jason Vogt, Professor Kendrick Koh, and Mr. Dan Grabarczyk, all from the Naval War College. Their article is titled, Preparing the U.S. Cyber Force for Extended Conflict, and it draws lessons from the ongoing war between Russia and Ukraine. They pre-recorded their remarks.
Good evening from the U.S. Naval War College. My name is Jason Vogt, and I'm here with my colleagues Dr. Kendrick Kuo and Mr. Dan Grabarczyk. We are the co-authors of A Tale of Two Cyber Forces, Preparing the U.S. Cyber Force for Extended Conflict. There is currently a debate going on in the U.S. government about cyber force structure. Our essay contributes to that debate by providing recommendations for how we can better balance the missions of our active duty and reserve component forces to achieve our national security goals.
Ukraine is the first major conflict to involve significant cyber operations. Our research has found that sustaining the pace of offensive cyber attacks in protracted conflict may be difficult. Russia, which has an elite-centric cyber force model, was able to conduct dozens of cyber attacks in the early phase of the conflict, including one against a U.S. satellite communications provider. But within a few months, the frequency of these attacks had slowed to a trickle. Conversely, Ukraine, which had no offensive cyber capabilities at the start of the conflict, has been able to leverage the effort of hundreds of thousands of international volunteers to conduct continuous low-level attacks on Russian banks, businesses, and critical infrastructure.
The U.S. military also employs an elite cyber force model, and our analysis, however, suggests that our current posture will be insufficient in a protracted conflict. Efforts should be made to consider how the U.S. can expand its offensive capabilities and better leverage reservists and volunteers. We therefore make three recommendations. First, expand the size of U.S. Cybercom's active duty cyber force committed to offensive missions by shifting more defensive missions to the reserves. Second, establish the National Guard as a primary DoD entity responsible for supporting the defense of U.S. critical infrastructure. And finally, develop plans to help operationalize a volunteer cyber force should the need arise. In closing, we'd like to thank you for selecting our essay for this competition.
And the first prize winner is Dr. Doug Bryant. His article is titled, Get Serious About the Science of Influence, and it addresses the fact that influence operations are poorly understood and employed because the science has not really yet determined what works. Dr. Bryant was going to be here in person tonight, and he told us earlier today that he unfortunately had come down sick, so he is not here to join us. So please applaud the winners of the IW contest. And now I'd like to introduce the winners of the 2023 General Prize Essay Contest. Since 1879, this has been our flagship contest. The list of past winners reads like a who's who of famous naval thought leaders. Then Commander Alfred Thayer Mahan took honorable mention in the first iteration of this contest. Other winners over the years include notable sea service leaders, many writing long before they achieved their highest rank and fame. Rear Admiral Stephen B. Luce, Lieutenant Ernest J. King, Lieutenant Ned Beach, Lieutenant Commander and later Senator Sam Stratton, Captain Wayne Hughes, Lieutenant Commander James Stavridis, and Commander Sandy Winnefeld are just a few of the notable winners. The General Prize Essay Contest is funded by Andrew and Barbara Taylor of the Jack C. Taylor Conference Center fame. We thank them for their proud and enduring sponsorship. This year we received more than 150 submissions to this contest, an all-time record. All three of these winning essays are thought-provoking and bear directly on the challenges facing today's sea services, and all three appeared in the March issue of Proceedings. This year's third prize winner was Navy Lieutenant Commander Patrick Rawlinson. Patrick is a submarine officer, and his essay, Torpedoes, Get Smaller to Think Bigger, addresses the need for more smaller torpedoes on fast attack submarines to improve their anti-surface warfare capability and capacity. Patrick will receive a medal, a check for $2,000, and a one-year membership in the U.S. Naval Institute. Please help me in congratulating Lieutenant Commander Rawlinson and welcoming him to the stage.
Thank you, everybody. I'd like to start by sharing my gratitude. Thanks, of course, to the Naval Institute for providing a forum for emerging writers in the Sea Service to get our ideas out there. Thanks to the Taylor family for sponsoring this award. Thanks to Amy and her team for bringing us all together tonight. Thanks to the Naval War College and the faculty there for providing mid-grade officers with the time, the focus, and the challenge to explore and develop their ideas and find a love for writing. And most of all, thank you to my wife, Nicole, who's here with me tonight, for all the support she's shared throughout my career and for expert help with those late-night edits that I need to get on the submission deadline. Congratulations to all my fellow prize winners. It's wonderful to be here with you tonight. So I wrote this paper to try to get the Navy to think a little bit differently. My whole career, I've been watching as our weapon systems get bigger, more expensive, more complicated, and especially in the submarine force, it's been a thing for 30 years that commanders are worried they'll go Winchester on their primary weapons in the first minutes or hours of a conflict, and we just don't have enough. We've been saying that for 30 years. We just don't have enough torpedoes to manage it. And so I saw an ongoing research project through one of the ARLs, and I thought, hey, this might be the answer. This might be the chance for the Navy to start thinking smaller packages, more diverse mission sets with their weapon systems, bring down the expense while raising the effectiveness. So I'm hoping that I have some influence and the Navy will take the move, not just with torpedoes, but throughout everything, to start thinking differently about what is the problem we're trying to solve, what's the mission that we need to accomplish, and are we using the right tools for the job? Thank you all for listening. Thank you all for reading. I enjoyed being here tonight.
This year's second prize winner is the Honorable James Anderson, former Acting Undersecretary of Defense for Policy and a twice confirmed presidential appointee. Mr. Anderson served as the Vice President for Academic Affairs at the Marine Corps University and Dean of Academics at the Marine Corps War College. His article, "The Next Taiwan Crisis Will Almost Certainly Involve Nuclear Threats," looks at how Russian nuclear saber-rattling in the Ukraine war, combined with China's growing nuclear arsenal, portends a dangerous threat environment in the next Taiwan crisis. Mr. Anderson receives a medal, a check for $3,000, and a one-year extension to his membership in the Naval Institute. Please join me in welcoming him to the stage.
So you may have noticed a tent out in the courtyard. In the spirit of the age, my wife and I decided to stage a protest, and we have two simple demands: a recount by the judges, and secondly, hot chow every day from the Navy mess hall. So, in a more serious vein, I want to thank the Naval Institute, all its leadership and supporters. I want to thank my lovely wife Emily, her steadfast love and support. Congratulations to the fellow winners, and frankly commend anybody who entered the contest, putting pen to paper or fingertip to keyboard. The essay talks about Taiwan scenarios, and of course there's a bit of a history here, right? And going back to the 1950s and the 1990s. But in those particular cases, we had indisputable conventional and nuclear superiority. The next major Taiwan crisis, whether it involves blockade, invasion, or a threat of an invasion, the equation is going to be different. Conventionally, the PLA has matched us in many ways, and numerically has exceeded us in the Indo-Pacific theater. Now, it may be the case that you may think that the Chinese would never issue a nuclear threat or resort to nuclear use, and you may in fact be right. But you're not necessarily right, and you may in fact be incorrect, which is kind of the thought process behind this essay, the importance of being ready. The question here is really not what we think about Chinese prospects for invasion or success, but what the Chinese believe about the prospects for success and our ability to respond. And in this equation, of course, naval expeditionary power is going to play a critical part. So that's the gist of the essay. It provides some recommendations on naval expeditionary strength, and also kind of thinking through these problems as ominous as they may be. If the essay engenders a little bit of discussion, a little bit of debate, a modest aim, then it will have succeeded. Finally, I'll say in closing that 28 years ago, I was fortunate enough to win the Leadership Prize at the Naval Institute. And now that I have a trend line of 2 data points, I'll hope to return in the 2050s for a 3rd time. Thank you very much.
The first place winner of this year's General Prize Essay Contest is well known to this crowd. Retired Navy Captain Sam Tangredi has been writing for proceedings for decades and placed 3rd in this contest several times, including last year. Sam is the Leidos Chair of Future Naval Warfare Studies at the Naval War College, and showing that persistence pays off, he finally won the jackpot with Replicate Ordnance, Not Cheap Drones. Captain Tangredi receives a gold medal, a check for $6,000. He's already a life member of the Naval Institute. He pre-recorded his remarks.
I appreciate this opportunity to thank every member of the U.S. Naval Institute for what you do to support the ideas that will shape the Naval Services, Sea Services, Department of Defense in the future, and will help us solve the problems and issues that we face in the current day. You'll never know how much you have done in supporting these ideas to be able to change, develop, improve the Naval Services, Sea Services, Department of Defense. But you do a tremendous amount. Now, the article I wrote and that won the prize, and authors for proceedings don't chase prizes as much as want to get their ideas to the Department of Defense. And winning a prize like this kind of puts the idea higher in the stack and gets it more attention. And that's what the authors want to do. They want to get the ideas thoughtful, professional, important, unique, and often contrarian ideas in front of the decision makers. Mine on replicators simply says that it doesn't make sense to spend money on small drones when you do not have the ordnance to fight a long-range war. I mean, maybe we could use the small drones on the beaches of Taiwan, but by that time, that particular scenario has not gone good for the West, for Taiwan. What we need is the ordnance that can fight that war. Now, my real message is not to you, because you understand perhaps what is necessary to foster new ideas. My message is really to the SECDAV CNO flag officers about current desire to form thought groups. There's a current proposal for a new strategic studies group, and others to generate new ideas. My problem with that is the new ideas already exist. There's no idea that the naval services have not adopted that did not appear in here first, perhaps long before people think about it, I go to plenty of war games and stuff where someone comes with an idea and I say, Major so-and-so wrote about that back in 2020. Perhaps you should contact that person because they can help you. You could help flesh out the idea and they could explain it to you. That's so rarely done because decision makers don't seem to be reading this cover to cover. And the ideas are here. I mean, maybe you have naval officers who don't have anything to do for a year, but strategic studies group executive panels are luxuries because ideas are already here. And if the leadership took this as seriously as it ought to, we would have a much better naval service. And I thank you, not simply for sponsoring an award. Yes. I hope the meeting goes well. Thanks.
All right, now I'd like to present a special award to two gentlemen who have contributed significantly to the mission of the Naval Institute during the past 4 years. Retired Navy Captain Jerry Roncolato and retired Navy Commander Paul Giara saw a need for the Naval Institute thought leadership to reinvigorate thinking and debate about maritime strategy after the long, calm lee of the Cold War. They insisted that the return of great power competition brought with it a need for new thinking about the United States as a maritime nation and how naval power underpins U.S. national power. Their idea became the American Sea Power Project. Unlike a lot of people who throw ideas at us and say, hey, Naval Institute, you should do this, and then they tend to walk away, Paul and Jerry rolled up their sleeves. They designed the project with an ends, ways, means plan of attack, and they recruited authors. They each wrote powerful articles on key topics, and they participated, this is no mean feat, they participated in weekly Zoom calls with my staff and me for the past 4 years. Since 2020, Commander Giara and Captain Roncolato have embodied our mission to provide an independent forum for those who dare to read, think, speak, and write to advance the understanding of sea power. For their leadership, passion, and tireless efforts, we honor them with a chair here in the auditorium of the Jack C. Taylor Conference Center. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage Paul Giara and Jerry Roncolato.
Paul's going to talk. I'm going to be quiet.
Jerry convinced me to pare this down to 30 minutes. So this is not the Academy Awards, but I do want to start with a few thank yous. Thanks first to Jerry, my partner in crime, my friend, my brother. This has been a Nantucket sleigh ride. If it hadn't been for Jerry, I would have been thrown out of the longboat. To Pete Daly, who heard us out and opened the door, to his staff, Bill Hamlet, Bill Bray, people like Brian O'Rourke and Julie Olver, and the other editors and staff. They've been just terrific. If you haven't tried it, I recommend it to you. And of course, to the authors who have submitted articles, and now to the contest authors who are being reviewed now. The premise of this whole enterprise was that the Navy has become disconnected from the Congress and the country and has lost that necessary awareness, understanding, and support necessary for a great American Navy. This is unsustainable because the United States is in the greatest state of geopolitical peril in more than 2 generations, with yet another Eurasian clique, the axis of chaos, aided and abetted by their violent proxies, rising to threaten American and Western security. This is great power competition, geopolitics 101, reminiscent of the wars of the 20th century. Sea power remains the greatest single determinant of geopolitics, without which nothing can be achieved. We might prevail
with a great and ready U.S. Navy. We definitely won't prevail without one. American sea power and the U.S. Navy and Marine Corps, first among joint equals in a combination of national power, must be at the center of national security strategy and national defense strategy. American sea power is at the heart of deterring unthinkable 21st century great power war. But since the end of the Cold War, there has been no national inclination to think about sea power, and we have failed to maintain it. Rebuilding American sea power is a national security challenge greater than the Navy itself and the Department of Defense. The Navy is central to the winning American national security strategy that combines great economic power, strong alliances with strong allies who dominate the Eurasian periphery, and military superiority and effective deterrence. The Navy plays consequential, determinative roles in each of these strategic points. The global economy, ours and theirs, depends upon the security and control of global maritime movement and the integrity of the Eurasian rimland. Navy forward presence cements alliances and allied solidarity and enables continuity of operations on a global scale. To the contrary, doubts about the Navy getting forward and staying forward, which now exist in allied capitals, equates to weakened alliances, no strategic solidarity, and porous transoceanic defenses. Every concept of military superiority going forward has an enormous Navy and Marine Corps component, from hemispheric defense and a new Monroe Doctrine to transoceanic sea control and power projection into Eurasia. Whatever you think of the American Sea Power Project, it is unfinished and remains a work in progress. This work must go on. There is no better institution for this task than the U.S. Naval Institute. You, the members, individually and as an institution, are the incarnation of this task. As long as there is a need for American maritime security, there will be a need for the U.S. Naval Institute. Read, think, speak, write.
I would say here endeth the lesson, but as Paul really pointed out, the lesson continues, and we have work to do. My last honoree that I'll honor this afternoon is the 2023 Proceedings Author of the Year, Captain Matt Wright, U.S. Navy. A helicopter pilot, Matt has been a consistent writer for Proceedings for the past few years, and in 2023 his writing took off with an impressive and varied body of work. He published 4 times, including his CNO Naval History Essay Contest third prize winner in the January issue, 2 pieces on naval aviation, and his September article about remote learning and the Naval War College. At our request this year, Matt also took on the Naval Aviation and Weapons Review and did a superb job in the March Naval Review issue. Ladies and gentlemen, a round of applause for the 2023 Proceedings Author of the Year, Captain Matt Wright.
Yeah, thanks, Bill. Oh, I get a medal too. Great.
I forgot about the medal.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Bill. I personally think very, very highly of the Naval Institute, and I'll talk about that for just a moment. But first, I'd like to highlight my wife, Kaylin. I need to say a few thank yous, starting with thank you to Kaylin. She's my better half in every way, but more importantly, she makes my writing much more intelligible. So what you're reading is vastly improved by Kaylin and her many edits. And for my 3 kids who are back home in Norfolk, who somehow understand when I disappear on Sunday afternoons to take part in my odd little writing habit. I need to say thank you to them. And also my parents are here, which I'm 44 years old, and it's pretty cool for me to get an award in front of my mom and dad. So thanks for bearing with me in that respect. But thank you very much for everything you've done, Mom and Dad. I'm always grateful for that. I want to say thank you to the Naval Institute staff, Admiral Spicer, Bill Hamlet, Bill Bray, my editor, Jetty Pompey. She's just outstanding. Lisa Doherty and Amy Starkey are just great. Thank you. I want to say actually thank you to someone who I've never met in person. Dr. John Cordell is a mentor of mine. You can imagine this during COVID was when I wrote my first article, and he taught me how to do it, but more importantly, he convinced me that it was worth doing it and that my idea was worth putting into a submission. So I want to say thank you to Dr. Cordell. And in that vein, I've tried to pay that kindness forward by recruiting and collecting a series of co-authors for my articles. So thank you to Danny Whitsitt, Josh Hanno, Tom Van Hoosier, Sam Calloway, and actually my best friend from growing up just across the Severn Rivers, Commander Jamie Powers. We published an article recently, the article up here about ASW combat elements, and it's a pretty cool thing. We grew up together in Arnold, and then decades later we blink. We're both COs of helicopter squadrons and published authors and proceedings. That's a pretty great thing. So thanks for being here, Jamie. And mainly, I'll say I'm just grateful to be able to spend my career in service to the Navy. I love the Navy, as I know pretty much everyone does here, except for the Coast Guard winners who are sweeping the competitions, apparently. But I love the Navy, in large part, and I can tell you, I'm a commanding officer right now, so I do sailor in-doc for our new sailors who come on board. And part of my role is to make sure they understand the importance of what they do. So I'm sure many of you have done something similar to this. And I can tell you when I explain the importance of the United States Navy and their connection to protecting their family, their loved ones back home, and American prosperity around the world, I talk about that, and I see their heads nodding. So you can rest assured that our sailors are standing on the watch, and they love the country just as much as we do. And to that end, proceedings is just a historic and a vital part to strengthening our naval forces. So as such, I'm just incredibly honored by being named Proceedings Author of the Year, and grateful for your time to pay attention to my words. Thanks.
Now it's my pleasure to introduce my esteemed colleague, Eric Mills, the editor-in-chief of Naval History magazine, to present the Naval History Author of the Year.
Hello, everyone. Well, as the captain indicated, it's my great pleasure to introduce you all to the Naval History Author of the Year, Ed Offley. Mr. Offley has been a military journalist for quite some time. He's also the author of 2 acclaimed books about the Battle of the Atlantic, Turning the Tide, How a Small Band of Allied Sailors Defeated the U-Boats and Won the Battle of the Atlantic, and The Burning Shore, How Hitler's U-Boats Brought World War II to America. I recommend them both. In 2022, Ed became a welcome and recurring presence in the magazine with a series of naval history articles commemorating the 80th anniversary of the war against the U-boats. Beginning with his cover story on Paukenschlag, Operation Drumbeat, Hitler's U-boat assault on the American East Coast. Ed continued that coverage in 2023, bringing the Atlantic U-boat saga to its victorious conclusion with the June 2023 article, From Crisis to Victory in the North Atlantic. In that story, Ed chronicled how major losses to U-boats in early 1943 sparked fears of German victory at sea until the Allies mounted a stunning turnaround that drove off the wolf packs. But with a solid background in military journalism, Ed has proved to be a great go-to for topics beyond the Battle of the Atlantic. His work for the magazine also included the October 2022 online piece, My Lifelong Carrier Deployment, a personal memoir of his naval service in the 1960s and his post-naval work in military journalism. Also in October 2023, he delivered one of the magazine's most impactful cover stories of the year, Fortunate Victory, a warts and all look behind the scenes at Operation Urgent Fury, the October 1983 U.S. invasion of Grenada. Ed pulled no punches in detailing how the invasion was fraught with disorganization, flawed communications, and the potential for disaster. But from it, there emerged crucial lessons in inter-service cooperation. To top off that coverage in the magazine, Ed also penned an online sidebar to all this titled The Phone Call Home, a Grenada Legend. Many might recall this military urban legend of the 80s. Did an officer improvise with a payphone to call in air support during Operation Urgent Fury? Well, if you want to know the answer to that, Ed revealed it for us here with the full facts behind that oft-repeated tale. Look it up if you haven't read it, and you've always wondered about that urban legend. The answer is online at Naval History. In fact, Ed's embracing of Naval History's online exclusive sphere was a great value add throughout the year, both in terms of augmenting the print edition's content in particular and in enhancing the caliber of the magazine's website in general. His other 23 online exclusives were A Bloody Encounter in the North Atlantic and Reflections of a Battleship Sailor, both in June of that year. Ed continues to be a valuable contributor to the magazine. In fact, his consummate 80th anniversary commemoration of Operation Neptune/Operation Overlord is showcased in the current issue. If you haven't gotten your copy yet, get hold of it today. Ed's powerful and insightful feature articles, combined with the forward-thinking way he has been at the vanguard of embracing naval history's growing online presence, garner him the distinct honor he is receiving here today. So join me in welcoming the 2023 Naval History Author of the Year, Ed Offley. You're supposed to say something. Picture? Oh, we got to do a picture. I wanted to yield the floor to you so bad.
Thanks.
You bet.
I can remember the moment this improbable journey of mine began. It was June of 1971. The USS Midway was in a 10-day in-port visit to Yokosuka, Japan. I held the very critical role on this supercarrier as the chief tour guide. And as such, we managed Boy Scouts, we managed church groups, school children. But one day, my superior, Lieutenant Junior Grade Ed Schilling, came running into the office and said, "We've got a hot one." I said, "What is it, sir?" He said, "Tomorrow morning, a group of retired World War II admirals from the Imperial Japanese Navy are coming to tour this ship." And I said, "Wow." I said, "What are we going to do?" And he looked at me like I was a idiot, and he said, "Very simple. Tell them what an aircraft carrier is." And I said, "I think they know." Well, as it turned out, I had just written or rewritten a concise history of not just the ship USS Midway, but the battle for which it had been named. And so when these elderly gentlemen came on board, I was able to essentially reiterate how our Navy of that era, of the 70s, was still very much echoing and vibrating and remembering, even not on a conscious level, from the immense war that had been fought across the Central Pacific. And it went well. I didn't get charged with anything under the UCMJ, and admirals went home safely. But it sort of planted a seed in my mind that got me interested not just in history, but in the specifics of the U.S. Navy and its role in our country's upbringing and growth and expansion. So I want to thank, in particular, Eric and the staff of Naval History Magazine, because you have given me a place where I get to do what I really like to do the most, the best, and that is write about the history of this great Navy. And I want to share an appreciation that Eric and Bill Hamlet are aware of, but maybe no one else is. And that is 151 years ago, when the Naval Institute was founded, I am proud to know that my great-grandfather, Holmes Edward Offley, was then serving as chief clerk of the U.S. Navy. And as I surmise, probably had a lot to do with helping them get that organization underway. He himself had 3 children who had lifelong connections to the Navy Marine Corps team. His eldest son, Cleland, was the assistant engineer on the USS Oregon during his historic dash around South America to the Battle of Santiago de Cuba. His daughter married Cleland's best friend at the Naval Academy, Ben Fuller, who rose to become the 15th Commandant of the Marine Corps. Unfortunately, his youngest son, Edward, my grandfather and namesake, was a bit of a rebel, and he joined the Horse Cavalry. I'm sure there were a lot of strained moments at Thanksgiving dinners when everybody came home for the visit. But in fairness, at the twilight of his 38-year career, my grandfather spent 2 years in Newport in the advanced course at the Naval War College, where he and a couple of other officers, including Captain Raymond Spruance, I think it was, and another Captain Morton Deo, I think he had something of note in World War II, put together what we've been talking about tonight, or listening to about tonight, which was a strategic paper warning about the danger of war in the Pacific. And unfortunately, the conclusions of that paper were borne out in blood and sweat. So all this is to say, I'm really, really glad to have had this opportunity. I'd like to thank Eric. I'd also like to thank my wife, Karen Conrad, who puts up with my long hours at a computer and supports what I do, and I hope to continue to do it well. Thank you so much.
My name's Adam Kane. I'm the press director, and I have the privilege of giving away or acknowledging the final award winner for the evening. Each year, the Naval Institute Press at the annual meeting recognizes its Author of the Year. We've handed out awards recently for authors who've written about 19th century whaling captains, commanders in World War II, or a POW who wrote his memoir and shared that with the world last year. This year's winner is Brent Drost Sadler. His book, U.S. Naval Power in the 21st Century, A New Strategy for Facing Chinese and Russian Threats, advances the concept of naval statecraft and calls for the pursuit of a new grand strategy that combines the power of economics, diplomacy, and military operations to check Chinese and Russian actions around the globe in an era of new great power competition. It's my pleasure tonight to welcome Brett to the stage and present him with his medal.
All right, well, thank you again, and I'm going to be extremely quick and to the point. It was a book written for an event that started in 2019 as China basically broke agreements and basically woke up a lot of people in D.C. to the real danger that we face in this great power competition. That's the book I wrote. I have another one that's coming, but if you want to talk to and get more in the insights than that book, the one that I just wrote, let's meet at the reception later. But I did want to bring and make one point tonight before I leave the stage, and that is a good shipmate of mine, Jerry Hendricks, coined a term called sea blindness. And I think this fever that the nation has been in for far too long, you can see it in Baltimore Harbor, you can see it in the Red Sea, you can see it in the South China Sea, is starting to break. And I want to announce earlier today a bicameral and bipartisan effort that has just been launched. And behind this is a series of legislative bills that should start to turn the tide and continue to put money and resources behind a naval awakening and starting to make true and put in force not only naval statecraft, but maritime statecraft. And so I look forward to meeting and talking with many of you after this event at the reception. And again, thank you to Naval Institute for the honor of allowing me to write the book. And I'm one chapter away from finishing the second book. So thank you again in the future. So. Oh, he's out there somewhere, so it's coming. Thanks. Thank you very much.
That concludes the awards portion of this evening's program. Congratulations to all of the recipients, and thank you to all of you who submitted essays for the contest and have published with Naval Institute Press throughout the year. Thank you for accepting the challenge, for accepting the dare to read, speak, think, and write for the Naval Institute. It's a testament to all of you that the open forum is indeed alive and well. And in that spirit, I'd like to welcome and invite the Honorable Robert Work to the stage to continue this evening's program. He will introduce tonight's featured speaker.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. I am the current chairman of the U.S. Naval Institute, and this is my last official duty in that role. Tomorrow, Admiral Harry Harris will take over and become the new chairman of the board. I love the U.S. Naval Institute. I recently wrote an article, and its title was "A Slavish Devotion to Naval Presence is Wrecking the Navy." You'll notice I did not get an award. But the thing about it was, I knew that it was kind of going against the headwinds of the American Sea Power Project. But Bill Hamlet encouraged me to write it and encouraged me to publish it. And that, to me, is what is great about this institution. It allows different points of view, even if they do not go with the prevailing winds of the time. And it's just, to me, the mark of a tremendous organization that can look at itself and question itself and say, what do we need to do different to get better and become another a world power Navy that represents the United States around the world. Now, we're all here in this beautiful conference center. One of the big things the board did over the last 6 years is, right in the middle of COVID, we decided to give it a whirl and build this place. And what I will always remember about that is getting a call from Pete Daly, the CEO of the Institute, and he said, "Bob, you're going to get a visitor tomorrow morning. He's going to give you a subpoena." And he said, the concrete workers are mad at us. And I was just glad he didn't tell me that, I was going to get some paper with a fish wrapped in it. But he said, "Don't worry, you're not going to go to jail. We're going to take care of you." That's good news, Pete. And I didn't go to jail. But I would be remiss in not recognizing Pete Daly, who gave his blood and his sweat and his tears, every fiber of his being, to the Institute and to this wonderful conference center. And I would just like to thank Pete. He was a tremendous battle buddy while I was the chairman of the board. I love movies. I'm always talking about movies, and he, told me about the Bedford incident, where most of you, I assume, have seen it. A really famous Cold War movie, black and white. Richard Whitmark, captain of a ship, of a destroyer. Sidney Poitier, a journalist who was on board. And they were sitting on top of a Soviet submarine, trying to keep it down. And towards the end of the movie, the captain is saying, "Look, this is pretty serious stuff. We've got to really show the Soviets that we're serious about this." And they got into a big argument because Sidney was saying, "Well, we can't start World War III, for goodness sake." And they're arguing back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And Richard Whitmark says, talking about ASROC, an anti-submarine rocket, he says, "Look, if I want to fire one, I'll fire one." And the sailor on the fire control board said, "Aye, aye, sir, fire one." Off went the ASROC, sank the Soviet sub. Just before the Soviet sub sank, it launched nuclear torpedoes at the destroyer, and it was destroyed also. But the fire control board for the ASROC system, Pete would always, I'd say, how's it going, Pete? And he'd say, green board 1. And that was when it said, okay, everything's ready to go. You can push the button. And the ASROC's leaving. And he said, it's I just lost it. Green board 1. And he says, if you look in the movie, you're going to see, and that is green board 1. They had it right. And so for me, I'll always remember Pete and everything he gave this institute. And I'd just like everybody to join me in thanking him for this wonderful organization that he took care of for us. Pete, I'm sure you're here somewhere. There you are. Well, it's my great pleasure to introduce our featured speaker tonight, the 39th Commandant of the Marine Corps, General Eric Smith. Eric was born in Kansas City, Missouri, but he grew up in Plano, Texas. He is a Marine's Marine. He commanded at the company level, the battalion level, the regiment level, the division level, the Marine Expeditionary Force level. He also was a combatant commander in U.S. Southern Command, highly decorated combat veteran, and just the salt of the earth. He was my senior military assistant when I was the Deputy Secretary of Defense. And, the thing I liked the most about him is when he would come in and he'd give me this particular look. I can't duplicate it, but this particular look and said, well, sir, maybe you should, which was him telling me I just screwed up something or, I could probably do better. God, I relied on that guy so much. So he's, you know how busy a commandant or a chief of service is. Him being here this afternoon is just a great treat for all of us. And I can't wait to hear what he says. After he finishes speaking, I'll ask him a couple questions, and if we have time, we'll take a couple questions from the audience. Thank you all for being here this afternoon. All of you support, in one way or the other, this great institute, and I encourage you to continue supporting, and God bless you all. Oh, I guess I ought to greet you.
How are you, Mr. Secretary? It's good to see you, sir. Good to see you. Hoorah, sir. Well, good afternoon. Can you hear me okay? Okay. Well, one, thanks, Secretary of Work. I always say, you and Secretary Fox, best bosses I ever had, and I mean that. Admiral Harris, good to see you, sir. It's good to see there's life after retirement. So I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful. But Mr. Work, it is truly good to see you. My best to Cassandra. Admiral Spicer, I'm honored to be here. It's great to see that there are so many people here. I don't think there's any midshipmen in the crowd. Maybe there's a couple, just a couple. The rest of them are studying, getting ready for finals. All right, we got some mids. There we go. So there's hope for us yet. Participation in academic conversations like the ones USNI facilitates are crucial for developing professional fighting forces. Before I talk a bit about where I see the Corps headed, I want to share my experience from last week at Modern Day Marine with all of you. In one common space, we had Marines, Marine families, shipmates, and our allies and partners. We had industry reps and partners, academics, members and professional staffers from the Hill, and individuals from all the other services there walking the stalls. This year was especially meaningful for me and an entire generation of Marines. At his keynote address, Secretary Del Toro, Secretary of the Navy, announced the naming of LHA-10 as the USS Helmand Province, and he named my wife Trish as the ship's sponsor. That was a tremendous honor for her and a tremendous honor for those of us who served in Helmand. And I think it was the right thing to do. One of my greatest honors to speak on the meaning of Helmand Province to our Corps and to have Trish support the ship's crew into the future. And the theme this year, Any Climb or Place from Sea to Space, couldn't be more appropriate description of where we find ourselves today and the challenges we'll confront in the years ahead. Today, 8 May 2024, the Marine Corps must be ready to respond to crisis or conflict in the Eastern Mediterranean and the Levant, Europe, the Western Pacific, the Horn of Africa, and every other corner of the globe, and we are. And the implied task of Any Climb or Place is against any adversary. From the jungles of the Philippines to open deserts of the Levant, from the extreme cold of Norway to sweltering heat of the Southwest Pacific Islands, the Marine Corps must be ready to bring the fight to our nation's enemies. We counter their irresponsible and predatory practices every day by actively campaigning, by being persistently forward. Marines deter conventional conflict and counter non-war military activities in the gray zone at the edge of crisis. And our ability to do so has resulted in an unrelenting demand for Marines for campaigning and crisis response that far outstrips our supply. Regardless of theater, there is one sentence I consistently hear from our combatant commanders: I want more Marines. The demands for our forces, our ARG-MUs, our amphibious ready groups, Marine expeditionary units, and our stand-in forces, such as the Marine Littoral Regiments, is high. I have every intention of meeting that demand, but I will note that that demand is increasingly difficult to meet. To the midshipmen in the room, that is what you're signing up for, so buckle up. To meet those responsibilities, we must maintain a constant state of readiness. Our nation needs our Marines to be forward deployed. Our combatant commanders need them forward deployed. Our fleets need them forward deployed, and our Marines want to deploy. If you ask a young Lance Corporal who's just finished their first deployment what they want to do, they're going to tell you after complaining about the first deployment, they're going to say they want to go back on deployment, because they'll go from Hawaii to Okinawa, they'll spend 6 months, they'll complain that they are away from their home base, they'll come home, they'll complain that they're not back in Okinawa. I don't know how it happens, but it happens. And it's just the wave of the Marine Corps. Generating and sustaining that level of warfighting readiness requires us to make some tough resourcing decisions, but maintaining that readiness is non-negotiable. Creating readiness isn't just buying parts, turning wrenches, and going to the field. It's also modernizing to create readiness for the future fight, not the last fight. Modernization, what we call our force design, is a prerequisite to win against the highest end adversary. And again, we believe if you're prepared for the high-end adversary, everything else is a lesser included offense. We've identified correctly tools that will be required to win against a peer competitor. We're seeing the proof of that play out in real-world conflicts today. In concert with the Navy and our combatant commanders, we've refined our role in the high-end fight. But it takes time, it takes resources, and it takes bottom-up refinement to get there. These two challenges, being ready to campaign and deter today and being ready to fight tomorrow, takes deliberate balancing. Over the next 3 years, we must effectively synchronize personnel, readiness, and investments to achieve this balance. And getting there might be the toughest challenge of my time as the Commandant. In fact, I'm sure it will be. Our modernization efforts over the previous 4+ years have produced incredible results, and in some ways created opportunities and decision space that allows for balancing. We aren't just talking about making hard funding choices either. Although in a fiscally constrained environment with unpredictable and delayed budgets, that's certainly part of it. And there's no members of Congress here, I don't think, but I can go ahead and say that having an on-time budget is the key, because every time the budget is delayed, that just gives time to the adversary. And that's time is the one thing that you can't give away. It's the one thing you can't replace. You can replace dollars, but you can't replace time. Part of how we achieve that balance is through our campaign of learning. Through our campaign of learning, we're balancing crisis response and modernization more effectively by also synchronizing them. Our forward deployed forces are constantly training, learning, and experimenting while actively campaigning. By doing so, we're not only taking bottom-up refinement directly from the operating forces, as we just did in Exercise Bala-Catan in the Philippines, but we're also getting new capabilities to the forward edge at speed. And we're not wasting precious resources on experimental units that will soon be disbanded. The Fleet Marine Force is doing the experimenting for us. Feeding what we learn in the fleet back into combat development process is a critical piece of the balance and synergy that we must maintain, and we will. All of that learning is done by forward deployed forces. They, the fleet, are the laboratory. And whether those forces are afloat or ashore, they're critically enabled by our amphibious warships and shore-to-shore and ship-to-shore connectors. Maintaining an adequate number of ready ships is a critical piece of the balance. The Secretary of the Navy and the CNO have both advocated for more amphib ships. And this year's 30-year shipbuilding plan has allowed us to move towards achieving the right mix of 31 amphibs. That's crucial, and it's crucial updates with LPDs on 2-year centers and LHAs moving to 3.5-year centers. That's 10 big decks and 21 LPDs. Those ships are absolutely essential to our continued ability to campaign and respond globally. This year, we also secured funding for our first landing ship medium, a critical inter-island littoral connector that will enable our stand-in forces to stand in and to move when necessary. The CH-53K, the MV-22, landing craft air cushions, landing craft utilities, landing ship mediums, and even the autonomous low-profile vehicles, or ALP-Vs. They form a system of mobility and sustainment necessary to maneuver in a contested environment. We'll continue to experiment with new ways to use that system of mobility capabilities to achieve our desired operational and strategic and logistical effects. Those innovations, new ideas, are coming from the bottom up, not the top down. They're coming from our Marines, not from a bunch of stars and senior executives sitting around headquarters Marine Corps or sitting around the Pentagon. They're coming from the bottom up. Everything depends on the Marine. We have to recruit, make, and retain the type of Marine necessary to win today and in the future. Their toughness, their adaptability, their innovation, that will continue to be the deciding factor in war. Because as we know, war is a human endeavor, and it always comes down to human will. Because everyone has machine guns, everyone has rifles, everyone has rockets, everyone has aircraft carriers, but it comes down to human will. And believe me, the Marines that we're recruiting and retaining have the will to win, and they want to fight. They're like dogs on a leash. They're just ready to be let off. And that's why you got to be careful about letting them off the leash, because they will go and they will attack. That's why we're not lowering and will never lower our standards to become a Marine. Not only because it's part of our brand, but because we can't afford to. Because first and foremost, the state of the Marine Corps is only as strong as the state of our individual Marines. In closing, let me simply say, world events show us that there will be no shortage in the demand for our Marines anytime soon, or in the demand for our amphibious ready group Marine expeditionary units, or in the demand for naval expeditionary forces and naval presence. Those are just the facts. And again, Ray, I'm thankful for the invitation to be here. And with that, let's see what questions Mr. Work has for me before we move to audience Q&A. And I'm especially interested in hearing from the midshipmen in the crowd, those who are not studying where you should be. So that was sort of a joke. Roster.
Well, thank you, Commandant.
You're welcome, Mr. Secretary. Thanks for letting me be here.
You know, of all the questions that I wanted to start with, this is a question that I should have asked you a long time ago. Everybody, I think I said, but if I didn't, the Commandant is an Aggie. And I've always wondered what the hell Gig-'em Aggies means.
So, I don't know. I don't know. Gig 'em means fight 'em. So
Well, I'd just like to state on the record that Hook'em Horns is a lot more evocative.
It is, and my daughter went there, so I'm a house divided. My son went to Texas A&M, he's a Marine captain. Our daughter went to the University of Texas, although she makes a lot more money than him, so she gets top billing because she's my retirement plan.
You recently released Frago 0124, and you described it as an interim step before you reissued Commandant's planning guidance.
Yes, sir.
And in the Frago, you mentioned 3 broad topics or themes: who we are, where we're going, and how we fight. Can you talk about each of those for just a minute?
Yes, sir. The who we are America's 911 force. We are a crisis response force. We're a force in readiness. We're an amphibious force. We're inextricably tied to the Navy. We are first and foremost a band of warriors, and that's all stop. The second and third?
Where are we going and how we fight?
So where are we going? We're modernizing. We're going to the high-end fight because we believe that all things are lesser included offenses if you're ready for the high-end fight. So we're going to a more distributed model, a long-range fires model, a ubiquitous command and control model that is really part of JADC2, Joint All-Domain Command and Control, so that our MQ-9s are able to downlink to any sensor, any shooter, and then deliver long-range fires and effects to open or close sea lines of communication. And I would say that, how we're going to get there is we're going to get there through the funding of Congress, and we're going to get there through experimentation. We're going to get there through the good graces of Congress, and we're going to get there through the combatant commanders.
And how about how you fight?
And how we fight, we're going to fight in a disaggregated manner, being able to disaggregate and reaggregate as we always have. So we'll always be able to form the cohesive unit of an infantry battalion, an artillery battalion, and then disaggregate it and pull it back together as we have done for generations. Because we do know that if you aggregate too soon, you build a target, and if you can be sensed, you can be killed. If you can be sensed, you can be targeted. If you can be targeted, you can be killed. So we are going to have to disaggregate and operate in smaller units. We're just going to have to, because the inevitable result of not doing so will be devastating.
Now, of course, who we are is all about people, which you spoke about in your remarks. And are America's sons and daughters do they still want to be Marines? We've heard a lot about the recruiting problems of the Joint Force. How is the Marine Corps doing in recruiting? Are you still attracting the talent and the quality of young men and women that you need for this modernized Marine Corps?
Yeah, absolutely, Mr. Secretary. We absolutely are. We're the only service that made our recruiting mission this year. And again, we always make it. We're Marines. We make mission. My son's a recruiter, and he knows if he doesn't make mission, he doesn't get to come home for Christmas. And he's making his mission. He's an officer recruiter. He's at Texas A&M. So he's in a target-rich environment. But we have made our mission. We've always made our mission. And I would say it's precisely because we're not selling anything. We're offering. If you want a chance to be a Marine, you want a chance to try out, I'm not sure you can make it, but step up to the pull-up bar and we'll see what you can do. Step up to the track and let's see what you can do. Step up and try out for the team. And if you're good enough to make it, then you make it. And if you're not, then you can go somewhere else. And we're not going to bend our standards for anybody. And that almost pushing away of individuals who are interested is the secret, I think. But we haven't lowered our standards, and we won't. And we're making officer and enlisted recruiting numbers.
Great. Now, Force Design 2030 was the title of the modernization efforts of the Marine Corps. When you were the head of Combat Development Integration down in Quantico, helped General Berger conceive of this modernized Marine Corps. And there was a lot of pushback, especially from the retired general officer community. Have you made any notable changes from the beginning, or are you still on vector?
Yes, sir. Still on vector. You know, I've spoken to many of the retired general officers who took issue with where we're going, and I reminded them, frankly, that there's only one commandant at a time, and that it was based on the national defense strategy. And as Marines, we follow our lawful orders, and the lawful order was to modernize, to meet the national defense strategy. Because frankly, what we found is we were not organized, trained, or equipped to deal with the pressing threat of the PRC. We just weren't. And had we gone to war with the PRC formed, organized, equipped the way we were, we wouldn't have gotten into the fight. We would have been outsticked. And so it was imperative that we changed, and that we change. And I'll host the former commandants for a parade soon, I think this May, at the barracks, and we'll put the tribe back together, and you know we'll smooth out any rough feelings, and but there's only one commandant at a time, and the only guy that sits in the tank and that talks to the Secretary of Defense and that testifies on the Hill is me, and everything that I see through our campaign of learning tells me that we're on the right track.
And how are the young Marines reacting to it? I mean, when they heard all of this critiquing and saying this is the wrong way, this is a big mistake, how are they responding to that type of criticism and to the changes that you're making?
Yeah, to the criticisms, I don't think they paid any attention to it, to be honest with you. I think they, you know, they're more interested in getting to the field and fighting. And how they're responding to the changes, they're embracing them. I mean, it's a little bit like the iPhone. I mean, you get a new iPhone and I mean, a guy like me, I fiddle with it for an hour and a half, or I just give it to my son for 30 minutes and he fixes it. The youngsters understand the dynamic. They understand the need for range. They understand the need to conceal their movements. They understand if you can be sensed, you can be targeted, and if you can be targeted, you can be killed. And the reverse is true. If you can sense at range, you can target at range, and you can kill at range. And they understand that. So they're all supportive of it. They got a mission, and they're executing their mission. And I would say, especially, you know, 11th Marines, your old outfit, they're taking on the long-range fires mission, and they're still conducting cannon fire. They're doing both.
Now, in your comments, you did mention amphibious shipping.
Yes,
and this has been a point of contention between the Marine Corps and the Navy for the last 2 years. So are you confident we've gotten over that hump, that the Navy and the Marine Corps are now locked up, and the Secretary of the Navy is talking to Congress to get the resources necessary to build the 31 amphibs that you say are necessary?
Yes, sir. Admiral Franchetti and I, she's a great shipmate. If you don't know Lisa Franchetti, you're missing out. You need to get to know her. She's the best CNO that I know. And I say that because she's...
Oh, you only have one.
Well, only one at a time. So she's the finest CNO that I have known. And that's high praise, because I've known some really fine CNOs. But she and I have locked shields on 31. And the SecNav is all on board with it. I've testified, I think, 3 times to the HASC, SASC, and the HACD. I think I still have the SACD to go. But we're all locked in on 31. It's, 10 big decks, 21 LPDs. And we're determined to get there, and that's based on 80% readiness. And so the ship readiness model, OFRP, Optimized Fleet Response Program, has to improve for all classes of ships. And Admiral Franchetti would tell you that if she was sitting here, that it has to improve across all classes of ships. Delays in the yards are hurting the Navy, and they're hurting the amphib fleet as well.
One of the things that was delaying the Navy and the Marine Corps agreeing on the landing ship medium, used to be called the light amphibious warship, was couldn't get the requirements agreed upon. Are the requirements now agreed upon between
Yes.
the two services?
Yes, sir, they are. And we've got a RFP out, request for proposal. We'll take those, and we hope to have the first LSM on board in the next year.
We're running just a bit behind. We were going to take questions from the audience, but what happened was, just before I came up here, we've already gotten the midshipmen are submitting their questions. So this question comes from Midshipman First Class Luke, I hope I can say this right, Modal, Miatl. Am I close? Miatl.
Miatl. It is now. Now your name is Miatl. So your name forever here on is Miatl.
And the question is, General Smith, how do you cultivate an environment where your subordinates feel empowered to share both positive and negative updates with you?
Yeah, that's a great question, Midshipman Miatl. The way you do it is you don't bite their heads off when they bring you bad news. I mean, it's just simple. You cultivate an environment where you ask repeatedly, hey, what do I need to know? And when they tell you what you need to know, because it'll take you telling them 3 or 4 times, really, tell me what I need to know. And they'll say, everything's fine, everything's fine, everything's fine. And then about the 4th time, they'll say, well, our barracks are in disrepair, or, well, the chow hall's messed up, or the training was not good. And if the first thing you do is snap at them and say, what do you mean, and put them on the defensive, they're never going to come back. They're never going to come back to you, and your unit will just slowly degrade from the inside. So if you say it, you got to mean it. If you tell people, bring me problems, then you got to have the answers. Because I have heard leaders say, don't bring me a problem unless you have an answer for it. And I always thought, well, that doesn't make any sense. Because if I had the answer, I wouldn't have a problem. But be willing to accept their criticisms of how you're doing business and just take the time to explain to them why you're doing what you're doing, even if it's not what they want.
This next question is from Major Stone Holden. Sounds like a stunt man.
It does.
What developments in warfare exhibited on the battlefield in Ukraine have been the most interesting or alarming for you? And as a result, what areas do you wish your Marines were moving faster to adapt, change, train, or improve capabilities to address those developments?
Yeah, if you can be sensed, you can be targeted, and if you can be targeted, you can be killed. The ubiquitous nature of UAVs, constantly scanning and looking for frequencies, and the lack of discipline, frankly, this is not a criticism, it's a criticism of all, of Ukrainian forces, using cell phones. I mean, if you're using a cell phone, you're emitting a signal. And if you're emitting a signal, you can be tracked, you can be targeted, and if you can be targeted, you can be killed. So that's one of the lessons that we've learned from the Ukraine is you have to go silent on the net. You have to be encrypted. You have to mask your signature, because if you can be sensed, you can be targeted. And if you can be targeted, you can be killed. I know I sound like a broken record, but that is the wave of the future, that if you can't hide your signature in the electromagnetic spectrum, you don't stand a chance of getting close enough to fire the weapon systems you need to fire to have the effects you want to fire or you want to have. And that's what I would say is the biggest lesson. And the other lesson is the individual fighting spirit matters. Because again, by all rights, this should have been over many, many months ago. Russia should have won. I mean, big Russia fighting a smaller nation, but the individual fighting spirit of the Ukrainian soldier has outmatched that of the Russians, because they're fighting for something. And the Russians are being conscripted, and they're being told to fight. And so the individual fighting spirit always matters, and it always wins out, always.
This will be the last question. It's from Midshipman Second Class Colton Christensen. How has your leadership style changed as you moved up in ranks?
Well, so I'll try to be brief. it's moderated. You know, I don't knife hand anymore. I don't raise my voice anymore. And the older I get, the more I find out that I don't need to. And the older I get, I find out that I didn't need to when I was a second lieutenant, because I was wearing second lieutenant bars, and that spoke for me. So I would say my leadership style has mellowed some over the years, from being a second lieutenant and feeling I had something to prove, to now where, you know, I've kind of left it all in the field. So I would offer to you, when you take your first platoon or your first division, you don't need to knife hand or raise your voice. You just don't. You can get your message across because you're mom and dad for that young sailor, for that young Marine. You're the adult leadership in the room. And the hardest thing that you're going to encounter is you as a second lieutenant, if you're going in the Marine Corps, having to counsel a master sergeant who's 38 years old. And that's going to be a rude awakening for you. But it has to be done. And you're not going to do that, you know, with a pointy hand. You're going to do that kneecap to kneecap, as we're sitting here, as you used to counsel me when I was your SMA.
Never.
Contrary, Mr. Secretary. So I worked for Secretary Work when he was the Dep Sec Def. I was his senior military assistant and was privileged to work for him. You can't find a finer man and a more brilliant mind anywhere on the planet, and you can't find a better boss, because he was a really good boss. And I'm saying that at the end of the questioning. I could have said at the beginning to have easier questions, but I learned a tremendous amount working for Secretary of Work as we traveled around the world together. And again, you're fortunate to have him here moderating this panel. So I would, I'm not wrapping it up, but I would offer a round of applause for Secretary of Work.
Well, Commandant, the Marine Corps is extraordinarily lucky to have you at the helm. And the Joint Chiefs of Staff are extraordinarily lucky to have you among their ranks.
Thank you, sir.
There isn't anybody better. You gave us a scare on your health a little while ago.
I did.
You're all okay now? Everything behind you?
I'm good. I'm the luckiest guy on the planet. 2-second story. For those of you that, you know, don't have any heart issues, you might want to go get checked. Because I was running 3 miles a day, 4 miles a day, you know, 6-minute pace, and still doing pretty well. And was out after the Marine Corps Marathon. My wife ran the 50K. She's the big runner in the family. And I went for a little 3-mile run, and was finishing the run and went down right about a block from the house, and was seen to go down and found by a guy who was just in town for the Marine Corps Marathon, who's a certified CPR instructor, and was on me for the better part of an hour before an ambulance got there. Saved my life. And then I just had a heart valve replaced, so I'm stitched from here to here, but I'm lifting weights again and running, and, you know, a little slower than 6-minute miles, but I'm running again. So I'm the luckiest guy on the planet.
Is there anything you'd like to say? Anything more you'd like to say before we call it quits?
No, I just appreciate your forbearance as I you know, muddled through my answers and waxed rhapsodic on my health scare. I'm very grateful for all of your patience and for you being here and for you giving a dang about your Navy and Marine Corps team, because it's the away team, and it's the team that's going to keep the fight from our shores. And that's a fact. So thank you very much for participating. And for the midshipmen that are here, thanks for skipping out on your study hall to be here. And hopefully it'll pay dividends one day.
Well, I think we can end on just one note. Go Navy, beat Army.
Go Navy, beat Army.
Thanks for coming.
Thank you, sir. Yes, sir. I do too.
General Smith, we want to thank you for, we know your time is precious, so we want to thank you for making time for the Naval Institute and coming out. Thanks so much. We have a book for you. It's just out, The Melting Point by General Frank McKenzie. It
guy I know
happens to be
well.
published by the Naval Institute Press, by the way. Available next month, but for you, it's available today, sir.
Thank you, Ray. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Secretary Work, thanks for doing an awesome job moderating the discussion, and thanks for your 6 years on the board of the Naval Institute. Awesome job. We're going to miss you, but we thank you for everything you've done for the Naval Institute. So another round of applause for Secretary Work. Thanks again to L3 Harris for sponsoring. We really appreciate it. Thanks to the team that put all this together. I watched for my first time how it comes together. It's not easy. So hats off to the AV team. Hats off to the Naval Institute team. I'm going to call them out by name, and they hate when I do that, so that's why I'm doing it. April, Dawn, Amy, Franklin, awesome job. Thanks for all you did to get ready for this. And then thank you to everyone who came in person. We really appreciate it. Thanks to all those that are beaming in from elsewhere. Appreciate your being here as well. And then I welcome everyone who's here physically to go up to the topside terrace for a great reception. Thank you again for being here.